Welcome back, everyone. Now, in a previous video, particularly in my chapter breakdown of the American Yop textbook, the one we're currently using at my school, I didn't get into the election of 1824 because it's crucial. It's very important. But the election that happens in 1828, I would say, is even more so because it brings us Andrew Jackson, the president. But in 1824, he runs for the first time, and it is a crazy event. So let's get started. Now, the election of 1824 has four primary candidates. We're at the end of we're ending here what we call the era of good feelings. It's coming to an end very rapidly. The Federalist Party had collapsed. That had happened at the end of War of 1812. It had left the Democratic Republicans as the only major party in the country. And that really didn't mean that there was unity, but there wasn't any out in the open political fighting that we could really point at, not like the Jefferson versus Hamilton issues of previous decades. But within the Democratic Party, Democratic Republican Party, four main candidates are going to emerge, and each are going to represent different regions and interests of the United States. So John Quincy Adams is the sitting Secretary of State. He represents the interests of New England. He's the son of former President John Adams. He's a skilled diplomat. This is his life. He has been in politics his entire life. And he has a reputation for being intellectual, but also somewhat distant. He wasn't real likable. He tended to push people away, whether he intended to or not. Now, Andrew Jackson, he's a famous war hero. He had won victory at the Battle of New Orleans during the War of 1812. He represents the West. He's from Tennessee. He's a frontiersman. He's enormously popular due to his tough, self-made image. And Andrew Jackson's going to try to become president in 1824. William Crawford is the Secretary of the Treasury under the Monroe administration. He handles the money. And he was the candidate of the traditional Democratic Republicans from the South, but his health wasn't real great. It was failing during the campaign. If I'm not mistaken, he dies before the campaign, the election even happens in November of that year. And finally, Henry Clay. Henry Clay is the Speaker of the House. They represent the West. He represents the West as well. And he's known for his work on the American system, this promotion of internal improvements, tariffs, a national bank, a way by which to spur the national growth, which we saw during our discussion of the market revolution. So of these four people, three of them are solidly in government. Secretary of State, Secretary of the Treasury, and Speaker of the House. Jackson is the odd man out. He's really not in politics, but he's also the most popular of the three. Now, with no real organized party opposition, there's no Federalists anymore. The election quickly becomes a chaotic free-for-all. Each candidate are trying to build their own coalitions to get their supporters behind them. They're dealing with different parts of the country. But this election wasn't just about individuals. It reflects deeper divisions within American society as well. So by 1824, many states had moved away from the old system of state legislatures choosing electors. Instead, voters themselves are choosing their own state's electors. This is marking a significant expansion of democracy. But the new system is going to expose a growing rift between regions as well. When the votes were counted, Jackson led in the popular vote with 41%. Well, Mr. Ford, that's not a majority. It's a plurality. He has more than anybody else. 41% divided amongst what does Quincy Adams have? Maybe he's got 30%, and Crawford might have been able to get 20%. So you get the idea. As a matter of fact, yeah, Quincy had about 30%. But there was a problem. Jackson had won more electoral votes than other candidate. That's how you win, but you have to get a majority of the electoral votes. He hadn't secured that. According to the Constitution, if no candidate receives an outright majority of electoral votes, the election is decided by the House of Representatives. And this has happened before. It happened in 1800, back there with Thomas Jefferson. Remember that one? Now, the top three candidates move forward, meaning that Clay is out. He's finished. He's the fourth man. He has the lowest number of all the rest. So he goes back to the House of Representatives where he has incredible influence, but he's out of the running for the presidency. So here's where things get interesting and controversial. The Speaker of the House, again, Henry Clay, had considerable influence. Again, his job is to lead the House of Representatives. Now, Clay was out of the running, but he threw his support behind John Quincy Adams because he hates Jackson. Now, Adams doesn't have the most of the popular vote. That's Jackson. He doesn't have the most of the electoral votes. That's Jackson. But Jackson doesn't have enough to clinch it. So Clay, out of the running, giving his support to John Quincy Adams, is going to convince the House of Representatives to give the presidency to Adams. Now, Clay and Adams weren't always close politically. I think it comes down to a personality issue, really, between Clay and Jackson. There may have been some other parts to it, but that's, in my mind, the big part of it. Now, why would Clay support Adams? Let's get into what some historians believe. Historians believe that they shared similar views on issues like internal improvements and the tariff. Again, Clay's American system. And in any case, with Clay's backing, Adams is going to win the election in the House of Representatives. He becomes the 6th president of the United States, and shortly after that, Adams is going to appoint Clay to be his Secretary of State. What? So here's Clay. Hey, Adams, I'll help you become the president. Adams says, fine, great, I'll make you my Secretary of State. Now, if we look back throughout the history here, Secretary of State is a stepping stone to the presidency. Adams had been Secretary of State. Madison had been Secretary of State. Monroe had been Secretary of State. Thomas Jefferson had been. I might have missed one, or maybe I repeated one. I'm sorry if I did. But so here is a sort of a stepping stone toward the presidency. It was viewed that way. Clay is now in line to become the next president of the United States, potentially. So what happens when Jackson finds out? Jackson and his supporters are going to cry foul over this. They're going to accuse Adams and Clay of making a corrupt bargain to secure the presidency. Now, Jackson had won the popular vote and believed that the will of the people had been ignored here. He had gotten more electors than anybody else, but again, he hadn't met that constitutional threshold. So this accusation is going to stick, and most Americans say, well, maybe Jackson's got a point. And Adams' presidency is going to be haunted by this. Is he a legitimate president or is he not? And it's going to fuel Jackson's rise in the next election. Jackson starts to run for the next presidential term 4 years out, pretty much on day one of the Adams administration. Now, although John Quincy Adams does become president, his administration is going to be plagued by the fallout of the corrupt bargain accusation. Adams struggles to pass much of his agenda through Congress, and Jackson and his supporters are becoming more vocal and more organized. And the bitterness is going to lead to, of that election of 1824, leads to the groundwork for the formation of the modern Democratic Party. Now, Jackson had used anger and frustration from the 1824 election to really get people behind him, this new political movement. And this is a movement that would become known as Jacksonian democracy. Jackson championed the idea that the will of the common people should guide the government, and pushing for a more direct form of democracy as well. Now, I don't think he goes so far as to say we need to get rid of the Electoral College and elect straight off of popular vote, but he is going to encourage that the people be listened to more. He argued that the elites had rigged the system against ordinary Americans. It's a message that resonated deeply with voters in 1828 when the next election rolls around. So speaking of that, Jackson comes back with a vengeance. He wins the presidency in 1828 in a landslide over John Quincy Adams, who it's a repeat of the previous election, although Jackson clearly wins this time. And the victory is going to mark the beginning of a new era in American politics, one that characterizes the rise of the common man, the expansion of voting rights, and a more confrontational style of politics as well. So, what can we take away from this? The election of 1824 is more than just a contested presidential race. It's a watershed moment in American political history. It exposes the cracks in the old system of elite political control. It leads to the rise of a new political movement and eventually is going to shape the course of American democracy. It also reveals deep tensions between different regions and economic classes, tensions that would continue to shape the country for years to come. So thanks for joining me on this revisit of the of Jacksonian democracy and this deep dive into the election of 1824. This is an election that's going to transform politics in many ways. It's going to lay the foundation for a highly competitive and democratic political landscape that we continue to see today. And so if you found this video to be helpful, again, give me a thumbs up there so I know that this is good, that this is what you want to see. Leave me a comment if you want to, and I'll see you on our next history video. See you next time. Good luck on your test. You guys take care.